Letters from the Academy by Beowulf. At age 19, Quatre decides to enroll for a year at the Chinese Martial Arts Academy, where Wufei is currently teaching. These are the heartfelt diary letters he sends home to his dearly missed friends. Chapter 1. Day 1. To my dearest and most beloved friends, Troa, Duo, Hero, Noin, Relina, Sally, Hilda, and Rashid. I am missing you all so very much, even though it has been just 5 days since our wonderful, if a little emotional, farewell party. I just know these coming weeks and months are going to be difficult, knowing you are all so far away. I have arrived safely at the Academy, after traveling cross-country for almost 2 days. The Academy is located deep in Chinese territory, and the 16-hour train journey was grueling, but it was all worth it when I finally got here. This really has to be one of the most beautiful places on the planet. The setting is absolutely breathtaking, with the Academy nestled on a mountainside, overlooking vast, beautiful green plains, and a great lake that feels more like an ocean. I'm sure I'll write more about this soon. Enrollment was quite an experience. Today is enrollment day. The first day of term starts tomorrow. They had to process about 100 new students, including myself, who all arrived today. We had to hang around for a good while, in the main hall, while everyone was enlisted, filled out the appropriate forms, and sorted out with rooms. It's funny, even at the ripe old age of 19, and after everything I experienced through the war, I still felt intimidated and afraid, just like I did on my very first day at school, all those years ago. I wasn't the only one feeling like a fish out of water, though. Some of the other new students, particularly the younger ones, looked quite anxious, the poor things. I was befriended by some of the other new students, within just minutes of my arriving in the main hall. It seems being older, and may I add, almost the only person in the entire academy with blonde hair, as well as being the only Westerner, I was quickly singled out, and adopted as big brother, by a small group of these rather fretful youngsters, who mistakenly seemed to believe that I somehow knew what to do, and where to go. Actually, it really was a bit of a blessing, as trying to help them made me forget about my own nervousness. I remember Wufei telling me a while back that many parents send their older kids here, aged 13 and up, because it will significantly increase their chances of landing good jobs and careers. Wufei should be arriving here tomorrow. By the way, I'm not sure I'd want to force a martial arts academy onto my kids, if, or when I have any, but Wufei reassured me that although many of them often seem a little overwhelmed by the experience at first, by the end of the first term, most of them have such a great time here, they don't want to leave. I really do hope that is the case, especially for one, rather timid and anxious young lad, named Po, who literally had to be prized away from our little group, when the time came for him to enroll. Po spent much of the day shadowing me, rarely leaving my side for more than a few moments, and yes, Sally, as soon as I heard his name, I couldn't help but think of you. The accommodation is clean, dry, and cozy. I've been put in a small dormitory, large enough for 6 people. The room is not a bad size, and is cheerfully decorated in warm colors. It has 3 sets of bunk beds, one at either end, and one in the middle, which is mine. There are 2 large windows, with spectacular views, out across the plains toward the west, so we get to see the sunset each evening. I can see myself spending a lot of my spare time sitting here, with teacup in hand, just admiring the sheer beauty of it all. It appears I will be sharing this dorm room with 4 other students during this term, one of whom I have not yet met. Apparently he will arrive in a couple of weeks' time. My other 2 roommates appear to be fast asleep right now, as I sit here in bed, writing this letter. There's a guy called Uno, who's on the bunk to my right. He's 20 years old, and also classed as a mature student, the same as me. Although communication has been sporadic at best, because he can't speak much English, and I'm still struggling with my Chinese. He seems very pleasant and polite though, and I'm sure we'll get along just fine. The other student, who's quietly snoring in the top bunk to my left, is, in fact, Po, the boy I told you about earlier. It turns out, Po had requested the same dorm room as me. I always assumed they would separate the age groups, for accommodation, but it seems, they are flexible about it. Po is just 14, and I get the impression, it really wasn't his idea to come here. His well-meaning parents, have obviously paid a lot for him to be here, and so he's honoring their wishes, all the same. He's very timid, and doesn't appear to have much self-confidence at the moment, but I'm sure the Academy will coax out the best in him, just as it will in all of us. I know some of you have expressed misgivings about my coming here. But as I've said before, this is just something I really felt I needed, and wanted, to do. You all know how restless and unsettled I've been, since the war ended. I realized early on, that I needed to get away, and deal with it, so when Wufei first suggested my coming here, somehow, I just knew it was the right thing to do, that it would help bring some focus and balance, back into my life. Right now, I still feel, I have definitely made the right choice. Well, it's 10 PM now, and we all have to be up at 5 AM. There is an introduction and welcoming ceremony, in the main hall, later on tomorrow morning, where we will get to meet the rest of the students, many of whom have already been here for several years. I am very tired, so I'd better get some sleep now. Please do take very good care of yourselves, all of you, and I will write more, very soon. Yours always, Quatre. Chapter 2. Day 2. My dearest friends. I know I always like to say, that there's no time like the present to get started on something, but boy! Did we get started today! At 5 AM, the lights were switched on to friendly yells of, "Good morning, time to get up now," from the housemaster. 10 minutes later we were outside doing exercises, and a few minutes after that, we were running up the side of a mountain. Admittedly it was only a short run, just 20 minutes or so, but I truly didn't realize, just how unfit I have become. Some of the other, more fitter students, found it quite amusing to see me laying flat on my back, gasping for air at the finish. A couple of them, kindly made a point of helping me up, as the group headed off for breakfast, but I can see I'm going to have to work extra hard, if I am to avoid, being branded, as the old man of the group. Our group is named, Crane Group. All of the groups are named after legendary and symbolic animals, and ours, consists of about 20 first-year students. We'll be together for the first few weeks, while our raw abilities are assessed. Then we'll be sorted to more appropriate groups, based on our skills, and experience. Even on the first day, I have noticed a wonderful rapport between the students of our group. There's very much a "we're all in this together" sense of camaraderie, and I feel this bond will only get stronger as time progresses. Breakfast was great, the portions were huge. I was also able to sit with a group of some of the more senior students who are much closer to my age. I was a little unsure if they would want a first-year student sitting with them, but to my surprise, quite the opposite was true. It was they, who beckoned me over to their table and made a space for me. Whether it was because of my age, or because I am the only Westerner here I don't know, but they were very friendly, and all were more than keen to try out their English skills, which was great, because I was also keen to put the small amounts of Chinese language I'd learned into practice. After breakfast, the entire student population assembled in the main hall for the introduction and welcoming ceremony, which involved a few age-old traditions, like the sounding of those huge Buddhist horns, and some bells. The academy here has a heavy Buddhist influence. One of the major subjects here is Shaolin Kung Fu, which is taught by the protection fighting monks living in the monastery, adjoining the academy. If it's one thing I've come to learn about Buddhists, it's that they love color. There is color everywhere here, from the vibrant orange robes they wear, to the masses of brightly colored prayer flags and banners, hoisted up all around the grounds. I have to admit I was feeling a little conspicuous when all of us new students had to stand up at the front of the hall, and be enthusiastically applauded by the others, their traditional way of welcoming us. From up on the raised stage, looking back at the crowd and all around me, all I could see was mostly heads with jet black hair, and then there was me, looking like a platinum blonde light bulb. I guess it wouldn't have been so bad if I wasn't just about the tallest guy in our group. All that said, they seem to have accepted me here with open arms. I must admit to being a little apprehensive at first, about how I would be received. Wufei did warn me it was not often that foreigners, particularly Westerners, attended the academy, although he didn't see that it would be a problem. As it was the official day of welcoming, there was no afternoon training for first-year students. Instead, we were encouraged to explore the grounds and local area to try to get a feel for the place. A small number of us from the Crane group decided to team up, together, along with young Ko, and also Ono, my two roommates. Both of them are in one of the other first-year groups, the Snake group. The grounds are huge, with every inch of them being dominated by spectacular scenery. I'm really looking forward to training in such an incredibly beautiful environment. After several hours of exploring, I quietly slipped away from the others for a while, just to grab a little contemplation time for myself. I found a wonderful spot just below the main western wall. There is a large grassy ledge, that overlooks both the plains and the Great Lake nearby. The ledge also has a lovely old tree to lean against or sit in. I think I may just have to claim this place as my little hideaway. I'd imagine the sunsets will be breathtaking from there. I'll make the effort this week to find out for certain. I also had another wonderful surprise today. While sitting quietly at my newfound Shangri-La, admiring the view, I heard someone jump down from the wall onto the grassy ledge, some 10 or so paces behind me. At first I thought it was one of the other students from our little group, but then I heard a grinning voice say, "I knew it wouldn't take you long to find this place." It was Wufei. Before I knew what I was doing, I had bounced to my feet like a puppy, and with a huge grin on my face, ran over and eagerly embraced him. I think I probably embarrassed the poor fellow, a bit, with my over-enthusiastic greeting, but he didn't show it, or seem to mind. It has been almost a year since I last saw him in person, and I'm not afraid to say that I've really missed him, especially that dry sense of humor of his. I can't explain it fully yet, but there is something about Wufei that has changed in a very noticeable way. It is most wonderful to see. He has this sparkle, this lightness in his whole demeanor, that was never there before. I've really never seen him looking so happy or contented. I know you will recall about 18 months ago when many of us were living at the Winter Mansion, how Wufei was then, after he'd finished his work with the preventers. For ages he had that distant, distracted, and generally fed up with life look. He moped around the house snapping at anyone who got in his way, while his life just seemed to lack any sort of direction. I know many of us were very worried about him. I've never forgotten the day when the letter arrived from the academy, inviting him to come and teach the young students here, and I'll certainly never forget seeing the tears running down his face, as he read it. I think, somehow, we knew that day, Wufei was going to be alright again, and we were right. Sally's idea to secretly write to them with the idea, was a stroke of genius. After just 1 year of teaching here, Wufei has become third in command of the whole academy, and has a say in every decision made. He said he was honored to have been chosen for the role so quickly, but he was unlikely to progress any further, because he would never do anything that would take him away from teaching his students. Just in the short hour we spent together today, I could clearly see it's everything he lives for, now. The students mean the whole world to him. He said he felt he was personally responsible for the futures of all of the students charged to his care, and it's a responsibility he takes very seriously. It's obvious he really cares about every last one of them. He even makes a point of knowing every single student by name. I get the impression that if just one of them were to leave here with anything less than a perfect education, he would take it very personally. We could only spend a short time together, as Wufei had lessons to prepare for tomorrow, but I know he'll be teaching my group in a few days' time. I'm so looking forward to seeing him teach. Last year, Wufei and I did pre-agree on some ground rules regarding me coming to the academy. Despite us being good friends and comrades, I insisted that I wanted to be treated no differently than any of the other students, while I'm at the academy, and I'll be strictly following the curriculum. Just like the other students, I will be assessed over the next few weeks on my abilities and experience, and as I already have significant advanced martial arts skills, I will hopefully qualify, and be moved to one of the top-tier skills groups that I wish to be in. Once there, I can focus on further advancing and honing my skills, which is what I really feel is going to help me in my life at this time. We also agreed last year, that if I did come here, the fact I was a Gundam pilot would be kept completely secret. Only 2 other people know about Wufei's and my Gundam skills, number 1 and number 2 in charge of the academy, and that's how it will stay. Today had been a good day all around. I feel much more settled now, those around me are starting to relax more, and we're all getting on just fine. It was so good to see Wufei again, too. I told him that I was writing to you guys, and he asked me to say hi. We've got a day of heavy exercise ahead tomorrow, so I will have to sleep now, especially if I want to run up that mountain again. Do take care, my friends. I will write again as soon as I can. Love, Quatre. Chapter 3. My dear friends. Day 3, tired. Oh! So tired. Must rest, I must sleep. Day 5. 2 AM Saturday morning. The weekend is here, and not a moment too soon. After a week of the most grueling exercise ever, many of us have been left licking our wounds. I am in constant pain with severely aching muscles, some of which I think I've just discovered and used for the first time since my birth. Waking up in agony Thursday morning was bad enough, but I managed to work through the pain, and exercise as normal, but when I awoke this morning, I really didn't think I was going to be able to move at all. My roommate, Ono, was the same, but between us, we managed to encourage each other enough to see past the pain, and muster enough willpower to get up. Today's morning exercise was interesting. Over half the first-year students were hobbling, some could barely walk, let alone run up a mountain. Several were even leaning on each other for support as they slowly approached the training area. You could see pain written all over their faces. It looked like an exodus of walking wounded, leaving a war zone. I know it's a bit cruel to say this, but in a way, I was quite relieved it wasn't just us mature students, who were feeling the strain. Until yesterday, I was starting to get a little annoyed with myself, about how much I had overestimated my levels of fitness, but seeing even some of the very fit students struggling to move, made me realize my self-annoyance was unfounded. I think our PT instructor found it quite amusing, although he didn't openly show it. But credit where it's due, he did not make us run today. Instead, we did a special type of Tai Chi, a gentle routine, that after about 15 minutes actually started to deal with the pain. For some, it was almost a total cure. At lunch, Wufei told me that the first week of term was always like this, explaining, all the students at the academy went through it when first commencing training. He said it could be considered like a rite of passage, because the experience always helped increase the sense of family and belonging among the students, knowing everyone else had gone through it too. He assured me that the aching would quickly pass, and that the aches just affirmed we were doing everything correctly. Wufei was also quick to point out, there was no shame or dishonor in becoming like we were, and that it was certainly not a sign of weakness. He neither mocked, nor judged me. Throughout lunch, his words offered nothing but encouragement, assurance, and friendship. It was quite touching to hear him speak like that, and reinforces my belief, that Wufei's coming here, was easily the best thing that's ever happened to him. Friday afternoon is free time. Students are encouraged to relax, rest up, and generally prepare themselves physically and mentally, over the weekend, which is also rest time, for the next week of intensive training and exercise. With that in mind, after lunch, I went back to my room with the intention of just relaxing, and reading my book for a while. Unfortunately, when I got there, I found Po laying on his bed, sobbing. I must admit, the poor boy has looked unhappy all week, right from the first day he arrived. I did what I could, to comfort him, and after some persuading, I finally got him to talk to me about what was troubling him. It turns out, that just 2 days before he arrived, he had been to his grandfather's funeral. It seems they were very close, and the death was a sudden, and unexpected event. With all the rushing around, he and his family were doing, in preparation for him to come to the academy, the poor kid never got a chance to sit down and grieve. Well, he made up for that today. For over an hour he sobbed his heart out, finally letting out all the grief he'd been struggling to hold inside, for the best part of a week. I felt so bad for him, as he poured out stories, in slightly broken English, about how much he loved his grandfather, and how they spent so much time together. They were like best friends. It was also very sad, and on several occasions, Po had me tearing up as well. When he eventually calmed down, he looked exhausted. I encouraged him to try to have a nap, but he didn't want to be alone, so I offered to stay in the room, and just quietly read my book while he tried to sleep. He was relieved and grateful at my offer, and he ended up sleeping soundly for over 2 hours. Later on at supper, Po sat at the table with me, Wufei, Ono, and a couple of the other older students, as we ate, and I think for the first time, I actually saw him smile. Po really needed to get that out of his system, and although he will probably still be sad, for a while longer, somehow, I think he's going to be okay now. I'll be sure to keep an eye on him for a while, just to make sure. This evening, I finally managed to go out and watch the sunset, from that grassy ledge, below the west wall, that I told you about in a previous letter. Wow! It was even more spectacular than I had imagined. With such clean air up here, the colors seemed many times more vibrant than the sunsets I've seen elsewhere. I've never seen so many shades of purple, in nature before. It was truly magnificent and awesome. I mentioned that it was my intention to watch the sunset to Wufei, at lunchtime, and invited him to join me, which he did. He sat beside me, but for the duration of the sun setting, we said very little. Despite that, I could tell he was as impressed as I was. Only afterwards did we talk, and boy! Did we talk! I get the feeling, there aren't many people, who have talked with Wufei, in the way that we talked tonight. For nearly 3 hours, the conversation was unending and intensive. It was witty, and intelligent, and we touched on so many subjects. It was a strange feeling, sitting up there on that grassy ledge in the darkness, looking up at the incredibly clear and starry night, putting the world to rights, with someone who usually seems to have so little to say. I feel privileged that tonight, I witnessed yet another side of Wufei, a side that so few others have seen. It's a side I really wish he'd show more often, because it was truly great to see. Well, I'm going to rest up this weekend. Our skill assessments start next week, so we really get to see, who has the skills to move on to the more advanced class groups. It's important to me, to get into the advanced classes, so I will take some time over the weekend to practice my skills and readiness. I remain confident, I'll do okay though, bearing in mind I have the advantage of full-blown battle combat, something most of the students here, I'm very glad to say, have not had to go through. Well, it's 1:30 AM, so I really better sign off. As always, please look after yourselves. I will write again as soon as I can. Love always. Quatre. Chapter 4. Thursday of week 2. My dearest friends. What an amazing week it's been so far, as all the new students are assessed, to determine their skill levels. They are using set forms, like katas in karate, choreographed patterns of movements, that can demonstrate your skill and experience. Traditionally here in China, these various forms, can be unique to individual family lines, and are passed down from generation to generation. I'm glad to see that tradition is still very much alive and well. Each of us took it in turn to perform our chosen form, while everyone sat around and watched. There was a panel of instructors sat together, watching, judging the intricate complexities of the form, looking for those experience signs, such as stance, balance, and breathing, qi. I was surprised how nervous I was, getting up in front of the crowd to perform my chosen form. Many of the more seasoned students had also turned out to watch, adding to the pressure. A lot of the younger first-year guys were pretty nervous too. Youngpo was one of them, but then he surprised us all, when he got up and did an extremely complex form, absolutely flawlessly. It's pretty obvious he's been doing martial arts, from a very early age. He was one of the few who got a full, and enthusiastic applause, from everyone, which left him stood there with a beaming smile across his face. That was so wonderful to see, especially considering everything he's been through lately. My performance didn't get a full-blown applause, like Poe's, but it did get lots of positive mutterings, nods, and tones of approval, particularly from the instructors. I wanted to play things down, and keep it low-key, but still do well enough to get me into the advanced class, so I intentionally chose a very basic form, the long fist, from Shaolin Kung Fu. It's quite an elemental form, but I knew I could perform it, impeccably, with a great deal of attention to detail. To the trained eyes of the instructors, I knew I could demonstrate the high level of my skill and experience, without it necessarily being obvious to the other students. It all went extremely well, and Wufei, who was also watching, has since told me, that it's easily put me in the class I want. As you know, from my Gundam training, I could have chosen a much more complicated form to do, but I'm being very careful not to draw unnecessary attention to myself, or my Gundam skills. I chose to do only the bare minimum, to get me into the advanced class. I've also noticed the more gifted students here, seem to attract disproportionately more tutoring time, than the less gifted, which I think is a little unfair. Let's be frank, I'm only here in a very selfish capacity. I'm here for the sole purpose of trying to rebalance my life, by embracing the discipline of martial arts training. My time here will have little bearing, on the prospects or direction of my future, unlike most of the students here, so I intend to take up, as little of the instructor's valuable tuition time, as I can. There are so many deserving young students who need their time, much more than I do, so I refuse to let my presence here, take any of that time away from them. I will say this though, Gundam training or not, there are a few senior students here, whose raw combat skills, surpass my own, and there are people here I certainly would not want to fight for real. I'm just glad they're all friendly, and that none of them know about mine or Wufei's true identities. Our Crane group, had its first training lesson with Wufei yesterday morning, and it was easily one of the best lessons we've had so far. Don't get me wrong, I mean all of the lessons here are very good, and meticulously well planned, but Wufei's was, well, it was just exceptional. All the students here have huge amounts of respect for Wufei, and it's not hard to see why. He seems to have this very natural and articulate way of putting his point across as he's teaching, he never has to explain anything twice. Despite his potential to be fairly intimidating, as a master instructor, he somehow, puts everyone at ease when he's teaching. He is very relaxed, and patient with anyone who struggles to get it right, particularly the younger students, and when it does finally go right, he looks them straight in the eye, and tells them a very genuine, and sincere, well done. The best thing of all though, is that I can tell Wufei is completely in his element. You can see he's absolutely loving every moment that he's teaching the students, and seeing that, just reinforces to me, Wufei's being here, is so right. The muscle soreness is no longer a problem now. That first week was pretty grueling, but now things are getting less and less achy, with each passing day. This time next week, I hope, I'll have forgotten about muscle cramps altogether. Things are settling nicely into a routine now, although it will only be another week, before our crane group is split up, and we will join new ability-based groups. It will be sad to see the group disbanded, because we've all got on so well. I'm not sure if the very special rapport, and camaraderie we have, will be duplicated in the new groups. Even in this short time, it feels like we've all been through so much together, and we've helped and supported each other through all of it. I know we will still all see each other around on campus, but somehow it just won't be the same. Oh, listen to my negativity talking, what am I saying? Of course things will turn out okay, I'm sure they will. I guess I must just be tired, so I'd better sign off for tonight. Blessings to you all. Love. Quatre. Chapter 5. Wednesday week 3. My dearest friends. I feel a tugging on my heart as I write today. Oh! How I am missing you all so much! Homesickness has been very predominant this week. I really long for just a simple glimpse of home, a tiny thread of familiarity, to comfort me in this amazing, yet sometimes lonely land of culture, where I have been residing for almost 3 weeks now. I guess I was half expecting this at some point, I just didn't realize it would be so dominating. Thoughts of home have been occupying my mind constantly, and there have been times when I've even thought about heading back, just for a little while, but of course, we all know I can't do that, at least not if I want to achieve what I came here to do. It hasn't helped matters, that I had a serious confrontation yesterday with one of the older first-year students. It's been playing over and over in my mind, and if I'm honest, I have to admit the whole thing has been getting me down a little. He is about 17, I guess, and, oh! So arrogant, and rude. Full of prejudice, and displaying all the classic hallmarks of a bully. He said he had a real problem with me being here, being a Westerner. He claimed that allowing outsiders to learn these indigenous Chinese martial arts, was taking away their purity, and diluting the culture. The kid was clearly misinformed on that particular notion, and I wondered whether this horrible attitude, was all his, or a result of his upbringing, and home life. I found my instincts leaning more towards the latter, after which I found myself wanting to feel sorry for him. Anyway, on a number of occasions this past week, he has given me some harsh glares and verbal insults, that I'd rather not repeat in this letter. I just, either ignored them, or simply smiled back at him, refusing to engage in the confrontation he's obviously been spoiling for. I did make efforts to try to sort things out between us. When I saw him alone earlier this week, I approached him, and in the friendliest, most diplomatic way I could, offered to settle our differences amicably, but it was no good. He wouldn't acknowledge me, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He just blew up in a rage, and stormed off. Things unfortunately, came to a conclusion, yesterday. There can be both positive, and negative things that come from playing down one's own abilities. One of the advantages, or disadvantages, depending on how you look at it, is keeping your opponent in the dark, about your true capabilities. Of course, if your opponent is doing the same thing, then things could get interesting. He had watched me do the very basic, long fist routine, last week in the skill assessments, and had assumed, as I was a first-year student, then that was the extent of my skills, and the best I could offer. His skills were quite advanced, and obviously, he thought that I'd be a pushover in a fight. Yesterday, he put me to the test. He purposely knocked into me, hard and aggressively, as we passed outside on one of the training areas. I was on the way back from morning training, walking and chatting with 4 of my crane group friends. I grew a little annoyed, as I quickly realized what he was trying to do. Not wanting to play his game, I just shrugged it off, and carried on walking. Unfortunately, he was not willing to do the same. I'm not sure what shocked him the most. The speed at which he found himself slumped on the ground nursing a bloody lip, or the fact he hadn't laid a finger on me, despite attempting to do some serious damage, by using a lethal combination of several, quite deadly maneuvers. After his failed attack, he quickly skulked away, looking very humiliated and embarrassed. There was a strange, and slightly tense silence from my friends, as they quickly realized that my skills were far more advanced than I had been letting on. I was really angry with my attacker for putting me in this position, as I really didn't want my true Gundam skills to be known by anyone. A large number of other students who had witnessed the event, began to wander over, and I figured it was time to make a hasty retreat. I signaled to my friends to meet me at the grassy ledge, on the west wall, where we would talk. I needed to do what I could, in the way of damage limitation, before rumors began flying. All sorts of dreadful things went through my mind, as I jogged away from the small crowd that had gathered. If they found out I was a Gundam pilot, my time here would be over. I certainly couldn't stay here with that kind of attention. The Gundams are widely revered among the students. I often overhear conversations, where they are excitedly talked about, or referred to. The Gundam pilots are heroes to many, here at the Academy. I hated lying to my friends. I felt awful, but the best cover story I could come up with, was that I had seen some action during the war, and had trained as a soldier. I suppose technically, it wasn't lying, at least that's what I'm telling myself to ease the guilt. I told them the real reasons for my being here, and literally pleaded with them not to tell anyone about my war past. I said it caused too many painful memories to speak of it. They were so good, so understanding, and more than willing to help me keep it quiet. I felt like such a hypocrite, but it was either that, or almost certainly be forced to leave. I guess there are times, when the occasional white lie, or slight manipulation of the truth really is necessary to maintain the status quo. Some things are just best left being unknown. I'm certain this was one such occasion. I went back to my room and tried to read for a while, but I was way too distracted, with the incident playing over and over in my mind. Eventually, Wufei poked his head around the door and asked if we could talk for a while. He had a serious, concerned look on his face, and I knew straight away, it was about the incident. We decided to go outside and take a walk through the grounds, while we talked. A few minutes later, we were walking on the upper pathway, that led to the mountain track we had been running up and down each morning. Wufei told me he'd heard what had happened. He was quick to assure me that I was totally vindicated of any responsibility, and that I was not to blame in any way, which I must admit, even though I knew already, was reassuring to hear, especially coming from him. He told me that several of the other students had come to him and expressed grave concern at what they had witnessed. All were quick to exclude me from any blame, but were genuinely concerned for fellow students with such a loose cannon, in their midst. Wufei then apologized to me for the incident, which threw me a little. I tried to protest his apology, arguing that it couldn't possibly have been his, or anyone else's fault, but he stopped me mid-sentence. He explained that this boy, his name was Chang, by the way, had already been reprimanded 3 times for bad behavior in the first 2 weeks, something almost unheard of in the academy. I was surprised to hear that, yet, not surprised, if you know what I mean. Trying to stay positive, I suggested to Wufei, that the boy was just misguided, and the academy was probably just what he needed to get him straightened out. At that point Wufei came to a halt. He looked at me, quite jadedly. He looked really troubled. "I'm afraid it's a lot more serious than that, Cat," he said, and I knew straight away, just by the tone in his voice, that Chang was going to be expelled. I asked Wufei if it was true. His reply was quiet and regretful. He reluctantly nodded, and told me that he had no choice. I was deeply troubled to learn that this young man was about to be kicked out of the academy, especially as it was through something that I was involved in. Expulsion is a big deal over here. It brings dishonor, not only to whoever is thrown out, but also to that person's family, and it can stick for generations. I would hate to bring that on anyone, regardless of what they had done to me, I protested, suggesting it was too harsh. After all, the kid was just misguided. Surely there was something there that could be salvaged, I thought. But then Wufei said something that I simply could not argue with. The moves, Cat, he said quietly. The attacking moves he used on you, they are so deadly, their use has been forbidden in this academy, for generations. He added to the case with something else that couldn't be ignored. Chang believed I was just at beginner level, yet still he used those deadly moves on me. What if you had been a genuine beginner? Wufei said. He was adamant I would have been at the very best, severely injured, or at worst, killed. My blood ran cold as it dawned on me, if Chang had chosen to pick on one of the younger, or more inexperienced students, we could have had a death on our hands today. It was a very sobering thought, one that neither of us were keen to contemplate. The full weight of Wufei's responsibility now became very clear to me. Wufei looked quite angry about the whole thing. Angry at Chang for doing what he did, but also angry at himself for allowing it to go this far in the first place. He was saying things like, I cannot believe I've exposed my students to such unacceptable danger. And, why the hell didn't I read the warning signs? He cussed angrily at himself, saying that 3 reprimands in just over a week should have been more than adequate warning, and that he should have sent Chang away, long before it ever came to this. He was seriously beating himself up about the potential danger he had failed to see. I did what I could, to try to convince him that he wasn't to blame. But he was having none of it. Finally he calmed down after he, unthinkingly said to me, I'm just so glad that he chose to attack you, and not the others. There was a long pause, before he realized what he'd just said. Then he looked at me and sighed, climbing down a little, from his stressed out state. He apologized and said that it didn't quite come out how he meant, and that he didn't mean, he was glad I was attacked. Poor Wufei, he got so stressed about the whole incident, that he didn't seem to know what he was saying. I soon found out, that one of the reasons Wufei was so on edge, was because he had not yet communicated with Chang's parents, and told them the bad news. It was something he was obviously dreading. For moral support, I offered to stick around while he made the call, which, to my surprise, he accepted. Once the dreaded deed had been done, he seemed a lot calmer. Later on, in the afternoon, I saw Chang walking out of the gates, carrying a suitcase. Outwardly, he looked defiant and unbothered, yet, I sensed a real sadness coming from him, as he glanced back several times at the main gate, as he disappeared down the hill. I made a point of staying out of sight. I didn't want to make it any harder for him. Several of the students had stopped and watched him leave. There were no comments, no calls, no waves goodbye, just neutral looks. I saw Wufei, later on at supper, although I decided it best not to join him. He'd made a point of sitting with some of the younger first-year students, and they were all engaged in light and friendly conversation with him. Much laughter came from that table, as I sat and quietly observed. Wufei seemed strangely amicable, much more than he usually is, and I tried to fathom the thoughts that must have been going through his mind, about what had happened earlier. There was definitely a sense of guilt there. His belief that he had exposed these youngsters to such potential danger, was something he will not forget easily, and knowing Wufei, I expect he'll have a hard time forgiving himself about it too. But as I observed him with the students tonight, I know the healing process has already begun. Just by sensing his unusual warmth towards them, I realized that this was his way of quietly saying, "I'm sorry. I won't let you down again." I know from now on, he'll certainly be much more wary of their safety, and will never knowingly expose them to such dangers in the future. Well, it's very late, I really have to sleep now. Love as always. Quatre. Chapter 6. Thursday, Week 4. My dearest friends. It's now been a week since that unfortunate incident with Chang, the kid expelled for bullying. I must admit, it played on my mind for quite a few days, before I was finally able to let it go. Things in general have moved on too. Our first year Crane group has now been disbanded. On Friday, we were reassigned to new ability-based classes, and began training in them this week. I'm glad to say that I was selected for the advanced group, called the Tiger Group, which is exactly what I wanted. It was sad to see the Crane group split up, but some of its members have also been assigned to my new class, so at least there are a few familiar faces at the start. One of those people is, young Po, the boy I told you about, who recently lost his grandfather. I learned a few days ago, that his family owns and runs a very well-known dojo, and began training Po from the age of 3. There's no escaping the fact that Po's skills are remarkable, yet I get the strong impression that Po is not here at the academy, of his own accord. He's also still quite despondent and unhappy, even though he says he's okay when I ask him, and I've felt the need to ask him a lot lately. I know he's still grieving for his grandfather, but I'm starting to suspect there's more going on, and I have to admit, I'm getting a bit worried about him. Since coming here he's not made any friends his own age, and now he's moved up to the advanced group, it's going to be even harder, as the majority of the students are much older 3rd and 4th years. He's hung around with me a lot recently, especially after I helped him through that upsetting time last week. I don't mind, but he really needs the company of peers his own age, not an oldie, like me. I keep wondering if he spent so much time studying and learning his skills, or perhaps having them drummed into him by an overly eager parent, that he's missed out on just being a kid. It's like he doesn't even know how to interact with other kids his own age. More worryingly, and what also confuses me, is how a kid who's clearly been samurai trained from a really young age, can appear so timid, jumpy and anxious all the time. I'm not exaggerating, he really does seem genuinely afraid of everything. I'm not sure what I can do to help him, but I will try to help if I can. Po is a gentle and sweet-natured kid, and it's really cutting into me to see him hurting like this. I can't just sit by and watch him endure this obvious unhappiness. I'll let you know if, and when I come up with something. After that incident with Chang, the expelled kid from last week, Wufei, has done a thorough review of the safety and disciplinary procedures here, and from what I understand, has recommended quite a few changes to the governing body. On Monday, he addressed the whole academy about it. There is an open assembly, on Monday mornings after training, where all of the academy students, nearly 400 of us in all, are brought up to date, on the issues of the week, and where any certificates and awards are handed out, for exceptional efforts or achievements. The meetings are designed to keep the students well informed of all things that are current at the academy, whether they are good things, or bad. Nothing is covered up, or hidden. This is instrumental, in preventing things like bad rumors, and any other elements that could sour the wonderfully positive spirit of this place. It's quite informal, and students are encouraged to ask any questions they wish, or to raise any concerns. Straight away in his address, Wufei confirmed that an expulsion had taken place last week, and that it was on the account of bullying, permanently laying to rest the rumors that had cropped up over the weekend. I guess he could have easily stood there, and droned on about what will, and will not be tolerated at the academy, and reminded everyone of what was expected of them, reciting the academy rules. But, he did not. Instead, he launched into an incredibly captivating, and inspired speech, about what it meant to have true honor and integrity, and what it takes to forge a true warrior's heart. For nearly 20 minutes, 400 pairs of eyes were glued to Wufei's position, as he stood at the podium. The hall was totally and utterly silent, apart from his voice. The entire gathering was completely spellbound, many of them leaning forward, straining to hear his words, almost daring not to breathe, in case they missed anything. Obviously the purpose of his speech was to remind everyone, that this kind of behavior would never be accepted at the Academy, but the way he had chosen to deliver that message, was truly a work of art. His speech emphasized heavily, that a true warrior's heart, must be free from prejudice, intolerance and hatred of others, and that for honor, skills must only be used for justice, and for the protection of the innocent, and the weak, but never for revenge, or self-gain. He continually paid tribute to all of the students stood before him, edifying them, by saying that he truly believed, each and every one of them was capable, of owning the heart of a true warrior, and with continued dedication to their studies, would each lead a life of true honor, and integrity. Toward the end of his speech, he heaped a lot of praise onto the students who had each come forward about the incident last week. Not just because they had done the right thing, in reporting it, rather than trying to deal with it themselves, but, because every one of them had expressed a genuine concern for the safety of their fellow students. Wufei closed by saying that it was his honor, to be able to teach students with such integrity, and felt assured, that with such a remarkable and positive spirit being so prevalent here, the Academy was sure to have one of its best years yet. A poorly written speech like that, could have been a train wreck, but this was just, quite frankly, brilliant. Wufei had nailed it. You could see, he'd captured the imaginations of all of the students. Many of them began to applaud him as he walked from the podium, and soon the entire hall was clapping and cheering enthusiastically, including most, if not all of the training staff. Wufei looked slightly shocked at the applause, although he tried not to show it. I could tell he was definitely not expecting the response. He just looked straight ahead, as he made his way slowly along the stage and down the steps. His face remained straight and serious, right up until the last step off the stage, when he couldn't help but form a very slight, involuntary grin. I only spotted it for a moment, before he disappeared, but it was enough for me to realize, that he must have been feeling pretty pleased with himself. I made a new best friend yesterday. I say that with a grin on my face, because I actually know very little about this fellow, except that every time he sees me, he just bows and grovels, and keeps trying to hug me. I'd never even noticed this young man before yesterday. I guess he's about 15. He was sat not far away from me yesterday at lunch, when he began choking quite badly. After various failed attempts by his friends to help him, the situation quickly got serious. It became apparent that nobody nearby seemed to know what to do or how to deal with it. I remembered a first aid technique I learned, called the Heimlich Maneuver. I hurried over, gave it a try and it worked. A lump of potato shot out of his mouth really fast, hitting another student square on the forehead. It was a perfect shot. Okay, I can laugh about it now, but at the time, things looked quite serious as this poor kid was really panicking, along with a number of his friends. He was actually starting to turn blue. Once he'd taken a few moments to recover, he became overwhelmed with gratefulness. He couldn't speak a word of English, so he just babbled on in Mandarin. Thank you, over and over. Holding my arms, and alternating between burying his face into my shoulder, and bowing, exclaiming repeatedly that I'd saved his life. Several of his friends also kept enthusiastically patting me on the back, in obvious appreciation. It was all getting a little embarrassing. I just did what anyone with such knowledge would have done. Don't get me wrong, I was very relieved the young man was okay, but I would have much preferred to just return quietly to my tuna salad, without such a fanfare. Eventually he returned to his table, but not before insisting on learning my name, and shaking my hand about 10 times. Later that day, and again today, our paths crossed, and the groveling started all over again, although fortunately not as intense this time. He just doesn't want to stop thanking me. I've tried insisting that it really isn't necessary, but he can't understand what I'm saying. It might be worth consulting my cultural database, Wufei, to see what I need to say, without insulting the fellow. Anyway, as always, I've spent much more time than I intended, writing this letter, and I really must sign off to sleep. Love always. Quatre. Chapter 7. Saturday, Week 5. My dearest friends, I hope this letter finds you well. It's now Saturday evening, and as I write this, an amazing sunset sky is making the whole dorm room glow orange. Classes in the advanced Tiger group are going very well. I'm truly enjoying the experience of being here. I've been getting along really well with the other students in the new class too. I remember when our beginners crane group was disbanded, I was worried about losing the high level of camaraderie we had all developed within the group, but my worries were unfounded. The sense of belonging and camaraderie within the Tiger group is equally as strong, if not stronger. I also see most of my former crane group friends, every day, and many of us still sit together at mealtimes, so everything is great in that respect. Homesickness is much less of an issue now. I still get the occasional yearnings for home, but with so many friends and good people all around me, it's a lot easier to shake it off. So things are going well for me. I wish the same could be said for my roommate, Po. The poor boy has just had one of the worst weeks of his life. I know I mentioned before, that I was worried about him. Well, it turns out my concerns were warranted. Po had been getting more and more down as the week progressed, and in the early hours of Wednesday morning, the tears returned. Me and my other roommate, Ono, were woken by his crying. We both sat with Po, and did our best to comfort him. His distraught state continued well into the early hours, until it was exhaustion that eventually forced him to go back to sleep. The last time I saw Po upset, he told me about his grandfather dying, but this time, he was very reluctant to say anything, and it increased my suspicion that there was a lot more going on here, than just simple grief. When morning came, Po had barely managed to get an hour's sleep. He even slept through the wake-up call. Ono was wondering whether to wake him or not, but I gestured it would probably be better if we just let him sleep on. He agreed. Missing classes here is a big deal. It doesn't happen often, and is considered disrespectful to your instructors and teachers, unless of course, you are sick, injured or out of action. I think Po's situation could have fallen into any of those categories, so before morning exercises began, both myself and Ono pulled the training instructor aside, and explained Po's situation, in the best way we could. The instructor was fine about it, and thanked us for letting him know. Later that day, I made a point of trying to spend some time with Po. By then, I had become even more concerned about him. He'd made it to afternoon training, but hadn't said a single word to anyone. At dinner he ate alone, and afterwards he went back to the dorm and just lay on his bunk, staring at the wall. After some persuading, I got him to join me outside at the grassy ledge, where I sit and enjoy watching the sunset most evenings now. Conversation was difficult, all I could get from him were subdued one-word answers. Eventually, I found myself, in desperation, gripping him by the shoulders, and pleading with him to tell me what was wrong, letting him know that I was really worried about him. On hearing my concern for him, he burst into tears again, and caved in. He told me everything, sobbing out all the details, of what was wrong, and why he was so desperately unhappy. It turns out that, for his whole life, Po has had traditional martial arts, relentlessly drilled into him. His overzealous parents had planned to train him, and send him here to the academy, even before he was born, in order to attain the globally recognized endorsements from the academy, that can bring great prestige and authority to the families, who own and operate their own dojos. At some point in the future, Po is to become the owner and manager of his family's high-profile dojo, and carry on the traditions of the teachings there. His parents are incessantly pushing him, and expecting him to exceed all expectations, to get top grades, so the family name can remain strong and honorable, within the powerful business circles, to which it is affiliated. However, among all of this meticulous life planning and scheduling, his family forgot to consider one rather important thing. What did Po want? From Po's perspective, his entire life has already been mapped out, to its entirety, but never once had anyone asked if he was okay with it, except one person, his grandfather. It was so heart-wrenching to hear. It seems his grandfather was the only person in the world who knew about this, and was working on Po's parents, to try to ease some of the burden and pressure they were putting on him, the same pressure that had now begun crushing him again. Po was completely trapped. To deviate from this high pressure, and uncompromising life plan, would mean being branded as a failure, and it could bring dishonor to his family, something he desperately didn't want to happen. Yet he'd reached a point where, he just couldn't do it anymore, not for another moment longer. This immense pressure, and responsibility placed on his shoulders, the grueling, rigorously intense levels of advanced training, and learning he was being forced to take on, the stress of his parents' expectations for him to get perfect grades, and now his grandfather, his one and only advocate, dying. It was all too much for him, it had pushed Po past breaking point. I could tell, metaphorically speaking, he wasn't just close to breaking, he was actually there. He was broken. He'd already stepped over the edge, and was now plummeting into despair. He was so distraught, he ended up bleeding out to me, his biggest fear, a heavy secret he'd been carrying around with him, for years, the weight of which had been constantly crushing him. It was a secret, he'd been terrified of his family ever finding out, but now, Po just couldn't hold on to it any longer. He told me everything. The secret is, that Po has, absolutely no interest, or passion for martial arts, whatsoever, and he never has. He hates it. He finds it tedious, uninspiring, and soul-destroying. Even from a young age, he has never enjoyed it, in fact, he abhors any kind of violence or fighting. The thought of him becoming a martial arts teacher, just leaves him feeling numb, and depressed. When he told me this, something clicked in my mind, and I finally started to understand the real crux of the situation. I'd often wondered how Po could be a very skilled martial artist, yet remain so timid, and anxious, all the time. One of the most prominent byproducts of learning martial arts, is self-confidence. It's automatic, you can't really have one without the other, that's why Po's timid disposition, has never made any sense to me, that is, until now. With this new information, I realized that, despite the impressive muscle memory skills he's built up over the years, it's simply not in his nature, to be a martial artist. For Po to be the person everyone is expecting him to be, goes against the fundamental nature of who he is, as an individual. It's like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree, or a butterfly to swim underwater. Sure, anyone can teach a kid a whole bunch of forms, and maneuvers through repetition drills, and if you start them at a young age, they'll probably get really good at them, like Po has. But martial arts is so much more than just the sum of its physical components. It's a philosophy, a code to live by, an ideology to subscribe to, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the most basic, and fundamental rules in martial arts should be, that you genuinely have a desire, to do it in the first place. You can't just force it onto someone like that, not like Po's parents have done to him. I don't care, if they run a high-profile dojo, and have a reputation to upkeep, this is just wrong, on so many levels. Po has never been asked, or given a choice. He's been controlled, and pressured his whole life, into becoming someone he doesn't want to be someone he isn't, and now, it's destroying his very soul. Po admitted to me, how much he dreaded, having to take part in any form of full contact training, and how it felt like torture to him. When I asked why, he shyly explained that he has an ultra-low tolerance for pain. I had to stop myself tearing up, as he described the agony of how it felt, how it hurt him so much, whenever he was made to do any full contact training, or competing. The more I heard, the angrier I felt. Are you kidding me? How can you expect anyone, with an ultra-low tolerance for pain, to willingly partake in full contact martial arts? Especially a child. That one fact alone should have been more than enough to send Poe down a completely different career and education path. I've rarely been so angry, or enraged. I'm almost ashamed to say that the hatred and loathing I was developing for Poe's parents was interminable. What the hell were they thinking? Surely they must have realized years ago that Poe wasn't right for this. All this time, his obsessed parents have been trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and now, I was here, witnessing the devastation of those reckless, selfish actions. Soon after he told me everything, I watched Poe's anxious and upset state evolve into just a quiet, despondent numbness. I could see he was physically and mentally exhausted, but more than that, I could see that Poe was broken. This was a boy who had lost his hope. I've learned some very hard lessons on the battlefield, the most valuable of which was that when hope becomes lost, so can the will to live. And that's not a good place to be in, not good at all. I was so worried for Poe's well-being, I decided it would probably be unwise to leave him on his own. I had to carry him back to the dorm room. He was so exhausted and fatigued he could barely walk. Once there, I helped him onto the lower bunk bed, and encouraged him to sleep, covering him over with a blanket. I knew something had to be done right away, so after getting Ono to stay with him, and watch over him, I set off to find Wufei. I'm sorry guys, but I will have to pick this up in the morning, and tell you what happened, as I can't keep my eyes open now. I must sleep. Love as always. Quatre. Chapter 8. Author note: this chapter ended up being a lot longer than I'd anticipated, but seemed necessary to the plot. It was difficult to consistently keep it in letter format, without it wanting to evolve into a story format all the time. Hopefully it still worked out okay as a letter. Sunday, week 5. My dearest friends. It's early Sunday morning, and I sit here once again on my favorite, if slightly dew-soaked grassy ledge, overlooking the distant misty land, slowly coming to life before me, under this new day's sun. I just can't tell you guys enough how beautiful this place looks, especially at first and last light. After a good night's sleep, and armed with a flask of tea, I can now tell you more about what happened this week, regarding Poe. As I said yesterday, I was most concerned for his well-being, but even more, his state of mind. I knew his situation had to be resolved quickly, and as a matter of urgency. Things could clearly not be allowed to continue as they were. I also felt a great burden of responsibility. It seemed I was the only one who knew and understood Poe's situation. I was the one person he had turned to in his hour of need, so I was determined not to let him down. Leaving Ono to watch over him, I left the dorm room, and set out to find Wufei. It seemed like the first, most logical choice, to appraise him of the situation, so we could figure out what to do. I found him in his office, doing some paperwork. Seeing the concerned look on my face, he knew right away something was wrong. I had his full attention, as I calmly told him everything I knew about Poe's unfortunate situation, and about how concerned I was, for his well-being and state of mind. Wufei knew of Poe, and was very aware of the family dojo. He told me it was one of the more famous, and influential, among the many traditional family dojos, spread across the country. He was genuinely concerned, even disturbed, by what I was telling him, particularly by the fact, the student under his care, was suffering. When I told him about Poe's ultra-low pain threshold status, Wufei looked dismayed, and angry. He said that his parents were under a strict obligation, to include such crucial information, on the enrollment forms. Had that information been known, Po would never have been allowed anywhere near the full contact training sessions. His curriculum would have been tailored to his abilities, and would have kept him protected. Wufei explained to me, how, nearly a quarter of the academy students here, do not train in the full contact styles, only the non-contact, or low contact ones. It's completely normal practice for the academy, and doesn't negatively affect academic grades or endorsements in any way. I recall, when I filled in the academy enrollment forms, there was a very large segment all about full contact versus non-contact, and how imperative it was to choose the correct and appropriate style of martial arts, to suit the student. Wufei walked over to a filing cabinet, and pulled out Po's original enrollment form. He took a short while to read through it, then he slammed it on the table, clearly frustrated. I could see he was taking this very seriously. He walked over to a chart on the wall, and began trying to work out, just how many full contact training sessions, Po had been forced to attend. He looked a little gutted, when he found out it was a lot. I knew he would be feeling personally responsible, for every moment of anguish, that Po would have endured, in silence. Wufei sat back down at his desk, and began scanning through Po's enrollment forms again. He concluded, that when his parents filled out the forms, they were more interested in the academy endorsements Po could achieve for the status of the family dojo, than they were for his personal welfare. He now realized, the forms were full of half-truths, and exaggerated claims, obviously intended to show the academy selection committee, what the parents thought it wanted to see. He explained, it was not the first time, overzealous parents, have tried to push the more dangerous full contact training styles, on their kids, in the mistaken belief, the resulting academic qualifications, and academy endorsements, would have higher merit, somehow, or would hold more weight, but that's just not true. That's not how things work here. As he looked at the form, he told me, they were normally very good, at weeding out any exaggerated submissions, by overly ambitious parents, who overestimated their kids' abilities, and that the academy would always be quick to act, only placing the students into classes where they wouldn't be out of their depth. Wufei seemed deeply troubled, that Po had somehow slipped through this safety net, and had suffered greatly as a result. I could see he was taking it very personally, as if it were a reflection on his own abilities as a teacher. He agreed, this had to be dealt with as a matter of urgency, and we both concluded, that the only way forward, was through conversing with the parents. By now, it was late, and nothing could be actioned until the next day. In the meantime, Wufei asked me if I was willing to watch over, and safeguard Po, until the next day, when he could organize some proper, more official help for him. I agreed of course. Wufei took a deep breath, and paused for a moment, centering himself. Then in a quiet, subdued voice, he asked me to promise I'd reassure Po, that everything was going to be alright. There was a genuine compassion and sensitivity in his voice that I'd never heard before. On hearing it, I knew Po was in good hands, and that Wufei, no matter what it took, was determined to make things right. In light of everything, before I headed back to the dorm, Wufei wrote out a special warrant, that gave me temporary discretionary powers. He explained, it afforded me immunity from the strict academy rules, enabling me to do whatever I saw fit, without question, in order to maintain Po's safety, and well-being, and to prevent any further suffering. Thankfully, Po slept soundly through the night. During the morning wake-up call, he began to stir, but I encouraged him to go back to sleep again. At first, he looked a little confused, and said he should go to training, but I reassured him it was okay for him to skip it and rest. He looked relieved, and whispered thank you, before falling straight back to sleep again. I remained in the dorm, while Po continued sleeping soundly for several more hours, before finally waking. We'd both missed breakfast, but that seemed pretty immaterial under the circumstances. I'd spend the time just sat on my bed, reading, but making sure I was nearby when he awoke. After waking, Po seemed rested, and much calmer, but he still wasn't right. His exhaustion from the previous night, combined with the stresses that were still crushing him, it had really taken a toll, and he looked quite pale and gaunt, the poor thing. I could tell he was still very anxious about his whole situation. Around 10 AM, while the rest of the campus was training, we headed to the mess hall together, to see if we could get something to eat. I was surprised when the staff said they had been expecting us, and they kindly rustled us up a really nice breakfast. That was my first indication, that there was a remedial plan of action already being played out behind the scenes. For much of the time, Po was quiet. He seemed numb and distant. Any conversation between us was light and minimal. I made a point of not telling him too much, I just continued to reassure him that everything was going to be alright, and that he didn't have to worry. As we finished breakfast, Wufei entered the mess hall and came over to join us. He sat facing Po on the opposite side of the table. Po suddenly became anxious again, probably thinking he was in trouble. The poor boy began physically trembling, looking scared and panicked. Wufei, seeing his obvious anxiety, reached across and gently gripped Po's forearm to try to calm him, reassuring him he had nothing to worry about, and that everything was going to be okay. It was the first time he had seen Po's true state, and he looked a little taken aback, at just how genuinely stressed, and fearful the boy was. In an unusually empathetic voice, Wufei explained to Po, that he knew about his situation, and that he was deeply troubled to learn he'd been suffering like this. Wufei seemed sorrowful, as he told the still trembling boy, that he would have intervened immediately, had he realized Po's predicament sooner. Wufei then pledged that he would be doing everything within his powers to help get the situation resolved, as quickly as possible. Po's anxiety state seemed to ease a little, on hearing Wufei's calming words. Wufei reassured him, that his academy placement was absolutely safe, but for the moment, he had made a temporary arrangement for him to take a short break from the academy, and the training, so he could recuperate. Wufei knew, that, for Po to go home at that time, and have to face his parents, would most likely cause him more harm than good, so he thoughtfully arranged for him to stay, at the nearby monastery, for a while. When he explained this, Po looked immensely relieved and thankful. He eagerly agreed to the arrangement, looking as if a crushing weight had just been lifted a little from his shoulders. Wufei gestured toward the door, and moments later, an elderly Buddhist monk, with a kindly weathered face, entered the hall and approached us. Wufei introduced the monk as Lama Zheng, explaining he was a close and trusted friend from the monastery, whom he'd asked to be a temporary guardian and mentor to help Po during the coming days. The monk bowed his head to Po, with his hands in prayer, and smiled kindly. Po respectfully returned the gesture. Wufei calmly explained, that the Lama was one of the wisest, most patient, and kindest people he'd ever had the honor of knowing. He said that the Lama's advice, insight, and wisdom, had always been extremely valuable to him, and that Po should not be afraid to seek his counsel. Po nodded, understanding, looking immensely thankful. Then he looked down sorrowfully at the table and quietly apologized for causing everyone so much trouble. Po's humble words clearly hit a raw emotion in Wufei's mind. His response surprised me a little, but it was very touching. He gently pressed his fingers under Po's chin, and got him to look up at him. Then, cupping both his hands tenderly on either side of the boy's face, in a sincere whispered voice, he urged Po to never again feel like he needed to apologize for this injustice that had been forced upon him. Po seemed really moved by Wufei's words and caring gesture. I saw his eyes well up with tears, as the immense sense of relief began to overwhelm him. It was like he'd suddenly seen Wufei as a guardian angel sent to protect him. I thought he might start crying again, but he managed to hold it together this time. Wufei's final words to Po were of more absolute reassurance. He told him to only focus on resting, and that he should not think or worry about anything else, assuring him that everything would be alright again very soon. I was surprised and impressed by the way Wufei handled it. His interpersonal and diplomatic skills have come on so much since I first knew him. I did, however, feel very ill-informed as we stood and watched Po leading the monk out of the mess hall. Wufei obviously had a plan up his sleeve, but he was being coy about revealing it, at least while Po was nearby. When Po and the monk had disappeared, I asked Wufei what he was planning, and he informed me, matter-of-factly, that Po's parents were expecting us later that day. A bus would be leaving in 30 minutes, and we had to be on it, if we didn't want to miss our connecting train. I was a little taken aback by the suddenness of it all, but I agreed to go. I guess Wufei could have consulted on the phone with Po's parents, but the situation was far too serious. We both agreed that a personal visit was warranted, and was also more likely to yield the desired results. Sure enough, an hour later, we were sat on a train, winding our way through giant valleys and mountain ranges. The residence was 2 hours away, enough time for us to discuss and plan our approach. Fortunately, Wufei had an ace up his sleeve that would hopefully end Po's suffering once and for all. Wufei's leadership position in the academy afforded him great power in the martial arts world, especially among the networks of privately owned dojos across the country. Although Po's family dojo was already one of the more influential among the network, an endorsement from the academy could exponentially raise that influence and standing, bringing it even greater recognition and influence. However, one stroke of the pen from Wufei could change all of that. The dojo clearly had its sights set on achieving an academy endorsement through Po. But it was an ambition that had become so fierce, so unrelenting, and so toxic, the pressure placed on Po's shoulders to achieve it had damaged him. In Wufei's eyes, and thus, in the official eyes of the academy, this was not only unscrupulous and unethical, it was unforgivable. Reputation is everything in this game. If the academy were to deny an endorsement to the dojo, on the grounds of such unacceptable behavior, the dojo's reputation could be tarnished forever, and it could even fold as a result. I actually felt a little sorry for Po's parents, as Wufei very assertively laid down the law, outlining to them in no uncertain terms the damage they had done to their son. Within minutes the mother was in floods of tears, and the father, after a somewhat stubborn reluctance to accept what we were telling him about his very tough son, eventually caved in, and admitted he'd already realized Po didn't have the right constitution for what they were pushing him into. He ended up breaking down, pacing up and down the room, shaking his head and saying, "Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done?" I realized technically, in most circumstances, these are not really the results one would hope for, when meeting the parents of a friend for the first time, but in this unique case, it was the best result we could have hoped for. After settling down, we all discussed how the situation could be resolved. Wufei negotiated on Po's behalf, ensuring we didn't leave, until the parents had agreed wholeheartedly, to give Po the one thing he needed most, the freedom to choose his own destiny. Wufei made it very clear that, given the circumstances, Po would definitely not be earning the academy endorsement that the parents had been pushing him so hard to achieve, even if he chose to stay on at the academy after this situation was resolved. Wufei knew, such an endorsement would act like a ball and chain for Po, continuing to shackle him to the martial arts environment he was currently so desperate to get away from. Wufei explained that if Po chose to come back to the academy at a later time, as a mature student, and strictly under his own volition, then, and only then, would he be allowed to attempt to earn an academy endorsement. Wufei offered to keep this meeting in negotiation off the official academy records, provided the parents agreed to, and honored their agreement, to free Po from the rigid life plan they had made for him, and to give him the one thing he needed, the freedom to choose. The parents, partly through shame, through guilt, and through fear for the future of their dojo business, agreed willingly, and wholeheartedly, to all of the demands. They both wanted to come back to the academy with us, there and then, to see Po, but Wufei advised against it, explaining that Po was undergoing intensive counseling at the monastery, and should not be distracted from it. He explained that Po did not yet know of our visit, and would not be told until we were happy the news would not damage him further. Wufei seemed a lot more at ease on the return train journey. I could tell he was nervous, and on edge, on the way out there, and, as it turned out, for good reason. I didn't realize until he explained on the way back, that if our visit was not successful, he would have had an obligation to involve the child protection authorities, a prospect he was really not looking forward to. Well, this has become an awfully long letter, so I'd better sign off here. I'll let you know how it all turned out in the next one. In the meantime, my love to you all. Quatre. Chapter 9. Saturday, Week 6. My dearest friends, I hope you are keeping well. I am writing to you today from the grassy ledge once again, watching the spectacular sunset happen before me. It's now been a week since the unfortunate drama with Po and his parents. I'm very happy to report though, that Po is now well on his way to recovery. His father came here a few days ago, after arranging to visit him in the monastery, where he is still staying. They spent time together on the neutral territory of the monastery grounds, working on reconciling their differences, under the mediation of Lama Zheng, the monk who has been Po's mentor and guardian for the past week. I've visited Po on 2 occasions since his father's visit, and he seems much happier. He's told me his father seemed different, and generally seemed more affable and caring towards him, than he usually is, as if influenced by a guilty conscience. His parents have also now wholeheartedly agreed, to let Po choose his own career path, and whatever he chooses, even if it isn't what they originally wanted, he will still be supported by his family. He's told me he may still consider taking on the responsibilities of running the family dojo, but if he does, it will be by his own decision, and not because it is expected of him. Only time will tell if it all works out, but I genuinely think this is one story that will now have a more happy ending. In other news, things are running quite nicely, here at the academy now. Everything is settled, and classes are fun and exciting. Wufei is taking our Tiger group twice a week now. We had our first lesson with him on Thursday. Once again, I have to take my hat off to him, with the way he carries out his lessons. I don't think there is a better teacher in the entire academy, although I suppose that's why he is one of the top bosses here. I can't stress to you, just how amazing his classes are. They are truly inspirational. It seems like he must spend days, planning each lesson, yet he teaches every weekday, so I'm somewhat baffled as to how he does it. I'm happy to report, my fitness levels are now up to scratch, and I'm no longer finding it so hard to take part in the morning exercises. In fact, and I feel a bit rotten saying this, but I now seem to be quite a bit fitter than some of my younger classmates, so I think the danger of being branded as the old man of the group, is long past me now. The Tiger class is a fantastic class. The level of camaraderie is high, and everyone feels like we're really a part of something special. After just a couple of weeks, there is a rapport, that equals that of my older Crane group, and I suspect that loyalty will grow stronger, as we move forward into the academic year. The skill levels of this group, are universally considered to be the highest in the academy, and the Tiger group is treated with a certain reverence, by the students in the less advanced classes and groups. It's strange, I always imagined there would automatically be an inevitable amount of grandstanding, a degree of subtle gloating or posturing, and the projection of an elitist superiority feeling amongst the members of the group here when compared to the less advanced classes and students. Yet I see, or feel, no sign of it, anywhere. In contrast, Every one of the advanced students project a very grounded air of humbleness, that at times, I find almost moving. It's quite wonderful. An example of this happened just yesterday, when one of the young first-year students, nervously approached and struck up a conversation with some members of our group as they ate in the dining hall. The kid had clearly been dared by his friends to approach the group members, and ask them a question. He seemed intimidated by them, but also in awe of the group members he was talking to. He wanted to know about a certain move, in one of the more advanced katas, and was genuinely looking for guidance from the experienced students. Had this been in one of the American academies, I know I could have easily witnessed the advanced group members having a laugh at his expense, and giving him a hard time, but here, they happily gave him their time, willingly and enthusiastically. Without hesitation they took this kid under their wing, and showed him the things he wanted to know, and more. There was no price to pay, no hoops to jump through, just good honest, solid advice, from genuine people who really seemed to care. It was quite a magical thing to watch, and to be a part of. And that pretty much sums up the whole atmosphere here at the Academy. It's sometimes hard to put into words, but there is a sense of belonging here that permeates all levels. It doesn't matter what level of skill you are at, what your background is, where you are from, rich or poor, intelligent or average, young, or old. The sense of belonging and being a part of something special is just awesome here. Wufei told me about this wonderful phenomenon before I came here, that's why he knew for certain I would enjoy it here, and he was right. There is so much we could learn from this. If schools, universities and academies in the Western world could operate like this, I feel the world might be a very different place. Well, it's getting late, so I must go now. But I look forward to talking with you all again very soon. Love, always. Quatre. Chapter 10. Final chapter. My dearest friends. It's been quite a while since my last letter, I do hope you can forgive me for not writing sooner, I do miss each and every one of you so much. I continue to remain deeply immersed in my studies, and am enjoying my time here immensely. The time seems to be passing so quickly. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact I am surrounded by so many really good people. Despite being the only Westerner here, I really do feel at home, and I've made friends for life. I'm going to miss this place so much, when it's time for me to leave next month. Do you remember my friend, Po? Whom I'm sure I mentioned in previous letters? Well, after a lot of soul-searching, and discussion with his family, Po has decided not to pursue martial arts as a career, anymore, and has now left the academy. He was able to secure a place at a distinguished, catering academy, instead. It turns out Po has always had a passion for baking, and had dreamed about running his own bakery since he was little. His parents knew this all along, and after the incident involving our visiting them, they stayed true to their word, and honored their promise to Wufei, to give Po the choice of determining his own career path. Po came to see me to say goodbye, before he left, and I'm happy to say, I'd never seen him looking so happy and excited about something. It was so good to see, after all the darkness and misery he's been through. The close friendship and bond we had developed during our time here, was very special, so saying goodbye was really hard for both of us. We hugged, and had a little cry together, but we're going to stay in touch, so at least it wasn't goodbye forever. I'm so genuinely pleased for Po, and I just know he is going to have such a great adventure, now that all the pressure has been taken off him, and most importantly, he's going to be happy. I'll be getting ready to return home in a few weeks' time, after graduation. I'm going to miss this place so much, but I'm so pleased I achieved what I came here to do. The discipline of training has left me feeling so much more grounded and settled, than when I first came here, and I'm ready to return to normal civilian life, with renewed enthusiasm. Wufei is also very happy about the way the academic year has turned out. Despite a few darker issues cropping up earlier on, he says it's been one of the best years he's experienced here. He's also been very complimentary toward me, and told me he's been impressed by my tenacity, throughout my time here. He'll be staying here for a couple of weeks after the academy closes for recess, but will then be coming to stay at the Winter Mansion afterwards. He says he's also looking forward to seeing you all again. With all the activities gearing up for graduation, this will likely be my last letter from the academy, but I'm looking forward so much to seeing all of you again, very soon. Until then, please do take care, my dearest friends. Love. Always. Quatre. The end. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to leave a comment for the author and rate this story. Other stories are available by Beowulf. Please see the author's profile for more details.